Hi everyone, it's Mike again, back with another video, this time about some logical reasoning basics. As I'm sure pretty much all of you already know, there are 4 scored sections when you sit for the LSAT, and 2 of those sections are logical reasoning. So you definitely want to make sure that you spend a significant amount of your prep time learning about logical reasoning and getting more comfortable with logical reasoning questions. So, 3 things I'd love to get done today with you in this video. One, break down the different types of questions that you're likely to see in a logical reasoning section. Two, talk about some of the basic strategies that are very effective for attacking these different types of questions. And three, also solve a couple of these problems together so you can see the process in action. Speaking of which, I'd love to put the 2 questions we're going to be solving together up right now, just in case anyone wants to try them on their own before we get into the discussion. So if you do, there was the first one, and here's the second one. Okay, please go ahead and pause the video so that you can give these a shot. So, in order to facilitate the discussion, let's start by talking about what it is that logical reasoning questions as a whole are designed to test. And you can take all of the challenges that are presented in the different types of questions and put them into 3 big buckets. They're designed to test your reading ability, your reasoning ability, and your mental discipline. When it comes to reading ability, you can think about it in terms of kind of 2 subcategories. One, your ability to understand what it is that you're actually reading, right? Your ability to understand the meaning of words correctly. And 2, your ability to recognize reasoning structure. And this is actually what's most important to the test writers. You can think about reasoning structure as the relationship between the different components of a stimulus. And over again, the reasoning structure that it's most important for you to recognize is that which is involved in creating an argument. So let's talk about that real quickly. What does an argument consist of? Well, it's got a point, right? One main point that's being made, and it's got support for that point. Okay, every argument will have a point and support. And you can think of the argument itself as the connection between these 2 things, as the relationship between the support and the point. And for the sake of this video and some of the other things we're going to be talking about, I think it's very helpful to kind of see the argument as a bridge, right, that connects these 2. Okay? And over again, the LSAT is going to require you to see this relationship correctly. It's going to reward you if you're able to do so. And it's going to punish you if you are inconsistent or if your understanding is not as clear as it ought to be. When it comes to reasoning ability, you can also put all the challenges into 2 kind of big buckets. One, these questions are designed to gauge your ability to recognize valid conclusions. Right? So when, say, adding A plus B does indeed guarantee a certain result, C. But more importantly, far more of these questions are designed to gauge your ability to see when reasoning doesn't guarantee a point made, why not? Okay, and this is one of the most important things, I think, to know about the logical reasoning section and about logical reasoning problems. There are 7 different types of questions that hinge on your ability to see in a very clear and specific way why the support given does not guarantee the conclusion reached. Flaw questions simply ask you to describe this problem as clearly as you can. Required assumption questions ask you, hey, if we're going to fill this gap, what needs to be true? Sufficient assumption questions ask, okay, if we're going to fill this gap, what's enough to guarantee that the argument will be valid, right? So what can we put in that allows this support to actually guarantee this conclusion? Strengthen and weaken questions ask you to address these issues in some way. Strengthen questions will help prop up or fill in that gap. Whereas weakened questions will ask you for an answer that exposes the problems in reasoning. Supporting principle questions ask you what general principle will help fill in the problem in this argument. And then finally, match the flaw questions require you to find an answer choice that has the same type of issue that the original argument had. Okay, so now let's go to one of the problems that I showed at the beginning of the video. And again, if you want to go ahead and give this a shot before we discuss it together, please pause the video and do so, and come back when you're ready. So I recommend that you always read the question stem first so that you know what your task is when it comes time to read the stimulus. Here the question stem says, Atrin's conclusion follows logically if which one of the following is assumed. The phrase follows logically is very important and has a very specific meaning. What it tells us is that we need an answer choice that when we plug it into the argument that's originally in the stimulus, guarantees the truth of the conclusion. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to identify in the stimulus the main point. We want to identify the reasoning given for that point. And we want to figure out why that reasoning is not enough to justify the point being made. Once we have a sense of that, we want to try to find the one answer that's going to fill in that hole and guarantee that the support allows us to reach our conclusion. So let's take it one step at a time here and first work on identifying the conclusion. They make it just a little bit difficult for us, as they commonly do, by splitting the conclusion up, right? The author's point is that the early entomologist was wrong. And in order to know what he means by that, we have to look back and see what the early entomologist said, right? And he said that the ants were bringing food to their neighbors. Okay, so we can bring these things together to figure out that Atrin's main point is that the ants were not bringing food to their neighbors. What's the support he offers? Well, there's this research that shows that the ants were emptying their own dumping site, right? So they were actually taking their trash over to their neighbors. Okay, so here's the argument. Atrins is saying the ants weren't bringing food to their neighbors. And the reasoning given is he's saying they were actually bringing trash over to their neighbors. And every time I'm asked to evaluate an argument like this, I know this support does not guarantee this conclusion. I'm not going to give it away here just yet. Okay, so I'd love for you to think about this on your own first. Okay, so if you need to pause the video, go ahead and do so. But how come this support doesn't guarantee this conclusion? And I also want you to think about, if you can see that, what would we need in order for it to guarantee the conclusion, right? What sort of answer do we need so that if we were to see, yes, they're emptying their own dumping site, then we can guarantee, you know what, thus they weren't bringing any food to their neighbors. Okay, now let's go ahead and think about how the answers relate to this hole in our argument. And even if you weren't able to see the issue clearly, right, you should still be able to see that the vast majority of answers will, no matter what the problem is, not be enough to guarantee that this support allows us to reach this conclusion. And so what you want to do first is you want to get rid of all those obviously wrong answers. Okay, so we want to go through the answers one at a time with a clear sense of the argument in our heads and a clear sense of our giant task, right, which is to make sure this support guarantees this conclusion. And think about each of these answers on those terms. Okay, so we can start with A. Ant societies do not interact in all the same ways that human societies interact. Well, that's great and all, but does that guarantee the ants weren't bringing food to their neighbors? There's a at best indirect connection to the specific points being made in this argument. And again, even if you didn't see the flaw that clearly, I think it's pretty easy to see that no matter what the issue was, A would not be enough to fix it. Okay, so we can go ahead and get rid of that answer. B, there's only weak evidence for the view that ants have the capacity to make use of objects as gifts, right? So if we think about food being a gift and we think about the ants bringing it over to their neighbor's house as a gift, maybe B is relevant. But is B enough to guarantee this conclusion? No, it's not, right? And if you think about it on those terms, again, fairly easy to get rid of it quickly. C, ant dumping sites do not contain particles that could be used as food. Immediately, it's easy to see that this is much more relevant to our argument than A and B were, right? And if we plug it in, it seems to play a very important role. Ants were dumping their own dumping site. Their dumping site doesn't have any food. Therefore, they weren't bringing food. Makes a lot of sense to me. So let's go ahead and leave it for now. D, the ants to whom the particles were brought never carried the particles into their colonies. This might be relevant if you thought of the conclusion slightly differently, right? Or if you thought about it in terms of whether the food was brought in or not. But that actually has nothing to do with the point being made, which is that these ants brought it over in the first place. And so if you think about needing to guarantee this particular conclusion, again, we can get rid of D fairly quickly as well. And E, the entomologist retracted his conclusion when it was determined that the particles the ants carried came from their dumping site. Okay, so the guy who originally said it took back what he said. Does that guarantee this conclusion? Right? Does it guarantee that since they were emptying their own dumping site, they weren't bringing food to their neighbors? No, it doesn't. Okay? So again, another case where even if you didn't see the flaw that clearly, pretty easy to see that E is not what you would need in order to fill that gap. So let's go back to the one answer that remains. Ant dumping sites do not contain particles that could be used as food. Does this allow our conclusion to be guaranteed by our premise? Yes, it does, right? So they're emptying their dumping site. It doesn't contain any food. So therefore, we can say, you know what? If that's what they're doing, they're not bringing food to their neighbors. And C is the correct answer. Now, the last issue that I mentioned, the LSAT tests, is your mental discipline. And we can really define mental discipline as your ability to stay on task. Okay? And one of the ways they test this is by giving you some tendencies and some twists. So most argument-based questions will, just like the example we saw, require you to be critical when you evaluate reasoning. On the flip side, some won't. And for the questions that don't require you to be critical, you want to make sure that you stay as objective as possible. There are 4 different types of questions that require you to simply evaluate the structure of an argument, but not be critical of the reasoning. Identify the conclusion question. Simply ask you, hey, what is the point being made? Identify the method of reasoning. What is the support-conclusion relationship? ID the role. What part of the argument is this one highlighted portion? And then finally, match the reasoning, right? So which of the answer choices has an argument structure that's most similar to the one that you're originally given? And then finally, there are a few problem types that don't center on understanding arguments at all. And you can think about these as outliers. We've got inference questions. These ask you, which of the following answer choices is most supported by the information given in the stimulus? We've got explain this questions. right? And here they'll give you kind of two things that seem to not go together in the stimulus. And they'll ask, how could it be true that these two things happen at the same time, say? Identify the disagreement questions. These questions are unique in that they will present two different people speaking in the stimulus, and your job is to see what it is that these two people are actually disagreeing about. And then finally, identify an example questions, right? And these ask you to find an answer choice that best illustrates a principle or point that is made in the stimulus. Let's go ahead and take a look at and identify an example problem. Again, if you'd like a chance to try this on your own before we discuss it together, please pause the video. So again, we want to start by looking at the question stem. This one says, the actions of which of the following individuals exhibit the most advanced kind of moral motivation as described by the ethicist? So I know that in this case, my job is not to look for an argument in the stimulus and to look for reasoning issues in that argument. Instead, my job is to figure out as best I can exactly what this ethicist means when he says the most advanced kind of moral motivation. And then really the key task of this problem is taking that simple understanding and critically evaluating each of the answer choices. Okay. So what this ethicist says is that the most advanced kind of moral motivation is based solely, so that's 100%, on abstract principles, right? So on ideals, say. This form of motivation is in contrast with calculated self-interest or the desire to adhere to societal norms and conventions. Okay, so going into the answer choices, what I'm looking for is an example of an action taken based solely on abstract principles. And what I'm looking for in the wrong answers, right, the answers to eliminate, are hints of self-interest or some sort of desire to adhere to norms and conventions. Okay, so let's take a look at each of the answer choices one at a time, and using that as our for our mindset. A, Bobby contributed money to a local charity during a charity drive at work. Sounds good so far. Because he worried that not doing so would make him look stingy, right? So clearly, this is not based on an abstract principle. It's based on how he looks to other people, right? So we can go ahead and eliminate A. B, Wes contributed money to a local charity during a charity drive. Again, starts off pretty good at work because he believed that doing so would improve his employer's opinion of him. Okay, so there's some calculated self-interest there as well. So we can get rid of B. C, Donna's employers engaged in an illegal but profitable practice that caused serious damage to the environment. Donna did not report this practice to the authorities out of fear that her employers would retaliate against her. Okay, so there's some clear self-interest there as well, and we can eliminate C. D, Jadine's employers engaged in a illegal but profitable practice that caused serious damage to the environment. Jadine reported this practice to the authorities out of a belief that protecting the environment is always more important than monetary profit. So here's Nadine acting solely based on an abstract principle, and there's no hint here of calculated self-interest, right, or a desire to adhere to norms. And lastly, E, Lee's employers engaged in an illegal but profitable practice that also caused damage to the environment. Lee reported this practice to the authorities only because several colleagues had been pressuring her to do so, right? So sounded pretty good for a while, but at the end here we see that Lee is adhering to some societal norms and conventions. So that leaves us with only answer choice D after the elimination process. And it's so easy to overthink these things, right? And you can kind of say to yourself, "Oh gosh, maybe she's protecting the environment for her own interest, right? So that she can live in a better world or whatnot." But that would be an example of overthinking it, right? We found clear issues with all four of the other answer choices based on information given in the stimulus, and looking at D on its surface, it matches up very, very well with the advanced kind of moral motivation the ethicist is discussing. So D is the correct answer here. All right, so we've now gone through all of the different types of questions that you're likely to face in the logical reasoning section. Keep in mind the big bulk of them, and in particular, a strong majority of the hardest questions that you're likely to see in the section are argument-based questions that require you to be critical of the reasoning. Okay, so you really want to get very, very good at identifying arguments and thinking about why the support in these arguments does not guarantee the conclusion reached. And all of these questions have something to do with your ability to see that. You've also got, as a bit of a counterpoint, these argument-based questions that don't require you to be critical, right? And in these cases, very important for you to stay as objective as possible. And then finally, you've got some questions that are not centered necessarily on your understanding of arguments, right? Inference questions, identify the disagreement, explain this, and identify an example. So that's it. Thank you so much for sticking with me through that whole thing. If you'd like even more free information about the exam, please check out my website, LSATtrainer.com, where I offer 8 free chapters of my book. That's about 100 pages of free instruction. I also have a ton of other stuff, including study schedules and infographics and additional videos and all that other stuff. And also, please, if you're interested in the book itself, check it out on Amazon, where you can see some reviews and see how other students have felt about it. Thank you so much. I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. Otherwise, I wish you the best with your LSAT prep, and take care.